Streets of Rage 5 is coming, and I'm very worried. Recently, Sega released a new trailer showing off gameplay footage showcasing that not only is a new Streets of Rage game coming, but also a return of some of the most legendary Sega franchises of all time. These include the likes of a new Crazy Taxi, Jet Set Radio, Shinobi, and even Golden Axe. While Sega would prefer me to ride the hype train and jump around jubilantly in anticipation for these titles, unfortunately that train has sailed and I was left waiting at the airport. So with that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Let's discuss whether this so-called Power Surge could potentially be a power cut. Yeah. On December the 8th, 2023, Sega published on their official YouTube channel the trailer showcasing the return of some beloved IPs, with the company promising that in this new era, many iconic brands would be returning with new energy and claiming that they were going to power these well-known series to the next level. Now, I've got a lot to say about this advertisement itself, which I will get to shortly, but first let's talk about what everyone is mostly here for, the games themselves. Each of the 5 series that have been announced to be returning are all impactful in their own right, functioning as some of Sega's favourites throughout the late 80s into the dawn of the new millennium, essentially spanning the most prolific portion of Sega's run as a hardware manufacturer from the birth of the Mega Drive through to the demise of the Dreamcast. While this was no doubt an amazing era for Sega, for more than 2 decades stretching past this point, Sega games have been like a box of chocolates. You never know which ones will taste like shit. Take Sonic the Hedgehog for example, the company's most treasured IP. But that doesn't mean that game development wise they treat this blue RNA seed with the same level of respect that Nintendo do when it comes to their beloved Ron Jeremy lookalike. The sheer amount of average to terrible Sonic games that are in existence is embarrassing, and it's testament to how well designed the character is that Sonic still manages to retain an audience at all. So, if I can't even trust the company to look after even their mascot with care, how on earth am I meant to trust them bringing back brands to a high standard which are clearly a lot less valuable to them? In fact, they've already demonstrated in the past that they were willing to run at least one of these IPs through the mud. Take Golden Axe. The franchise has a decent trilogy on the Mega Drive and an awesome arcade game in the form of Revenge of Death Adder. But everything past that point was a death spiral of poor quality. We had the Versus fighting game on the Sega Saturn, which literally no one asked for, and beyond that things got even worse. There was the tragically bad low-budget polygonal remake of the original for the PS2, and the incredibly awful Beast Rider for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. No one wanted a poorly designed 3D reimagining of the franchise, but instead a new high-quality side-scrolling beat-em-up, something Golden Axe fans still crave to this day. So with all of this said, why are Sega once again attempting to reinvent the wheel by creating for us another 3D Golden Axe, when all we want is another game in the style of the original? Does this company not like money? I guess they have never heard of the phrase, if it isn't broke, you can't fix it. I obviously would love this game to be absolutely amazing. I am just highly doubtful it will be based on the company's track record with the franchise. As for Crazy Taxi, personally I do not see why anyone would need to play more than one Crazy Taxi. The first installment did exactly what it said on the tin, allowing you to drive a taxi crazily. It was a fun, novel concept in its time, but by the time of even Grand Theft Auto 3, driving taxis crazily was reduced to nothing more than a side mission in a much more ambitious and impressive game. In a world whereby GTA 6 is on the horizon, a game where I am almost sure you will be able to drive a taxi crazily if you like, what purpose does a new Crazy Taxi serve in 2024? I simply do not get the point of bringing this one back at all. What more can they do what hasn't been done before? Unless they want to include a story mode whereby you fight Uber drivers for overpriced travel supremacy or something. As for Jet Set Radio, this is another franchise that has never overly excited me. I guess growing up in a graffiti-ridden urban sprawl in southeast London, it gave me as much a taste of gang rivals committing vandalism as one could have wanted. I'd rather leave the riffraff at the door. Shinobi, on the other hand, is much more up my back door. Stylistically, what I can see of this one, it presents the image of a beautiful title with a fresh modern coat of paint that gameplay wise remains true to the classic games on the Mega Drive that we all know and love. Saying that though, like Golden Axe, which we discussed earlier, this is yet another franchise that Sega have never always necessarily gave the respect it deserves. So it's great to see the series being brought back to its 2D roots exactly where it belongs. In fact, graphics wise, this new Shinobi shares a lot in common with Streets of Rage 4, and it would not surprise me at all if it was even created by the same development team. After all, not only do the games have similarities, but there is a Shinobi Easter egg in Streets of Rage 4, potentially alluding to the fact that such a game would be the next title that the team would work on. Speaking of Streets of Rage and the next installment in the series, as the title of this video suggests, I have stuff to say on such a matter. But first, there is one more thing I need to address: the bloody game trailer itself. What sort of emotions is this video supposed to generate? Is it meant to make me feel nostalgic? Excited about the future? Because if so, it failed on both levels. Who is supposed to be the main target demographic for this campaign, as the trailer just has me feeling old and confused. The most perplexing thing about this entire campaign is highlighting the return of nostalgic franchises that were popular in the 90s, with for some bizarre reason the actors featured expressing excitement about franchises they would have been too young to play, with it looking like they are too young to even remember the Sega Dreamcast being relevant. Why would these smooth-skinned, wrinkleless, TikTok-consuming infants be excited about Golden Axe coming back? That literally makes no sense at all. This is without even mentioning the high-end apartment they are residing in, which looks like it's in a major city far beyond the price range of anyone from Gen Z. Looking closely, the room has that pseudo-fake 80s aesthetic popularised in Stranger Things, a show I know young people are obsessed with. As someone old enough to just about remember the 80s from my earliest memories, I don't recall it looking anything like that in people's houses. But instead, the inside of homes still very much just looked like the same as the interior of the hotel in The Shining. Hell, I purchased the house in 2010 and it was still decorated like that until I fixed it. None of this neon nonsense inside homes like for some reason Netflix continue to try and make us believe. I am not ashamed to admit that I am an old man right now shouting at clouds, but the fact of the matter is, this campaign looks like it's going through an identity crisis, as it doesn't seem to know who this ad is for, what it is doing, when the ad is meant to be taking place, or why it even exists. Which I suppose is accurate, as few of these games seem to know who they are supposed to be for either. For what is potentially supposed to be a nostalgia campaign, it could have been done so much better. Take Nintendo for example, who demonstrate that they know their target audience, with many of their commercials showing parental figures enjoying games alongside the younger generation. They showcase their old IPs as both a nostalgia hit as well as for those who are fresh to the franchises. Whereas this Sega ad does neither of those things, and just depicts Gen Z inexplicably being excited about these games to which they should have no specific connection to. Which finally brings me on to the 5th Streets of Rage game, a title that I am desperate to be brilliant. Unlike many of the other games we have talked about today, there has never been a bad Streets of Rage title. It is a series with a spotless track record, which fans were desperate to have return until its epic re-emergence in 2020. Streets of Rage 4 was absolutely tremendous, and was a huge hit. In fact, its quality and success could be the very reason that all these classic franchises are now returning. If I was presented with a new Streets of Rage game that stylistically looked like its predecessor, then all of my worries would be put to bed. However, it looks like they're going to risk doing something new with the franchise. Well, new in a way, as there has been multiple attempts since the 90s to bring the series in a 3D direction. However, each of these efforts have ultimately failed, resulting in multiple prototypes being rejected or released without the Streets of Rage branding, such as the mundanely average Fighting Force. It's no secret that a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up has never successfully transitioned well to 3D, and such a genre does not seem to translate well at all. Take all of the 2D Turtles games for example, then place them side by side with the 3D ones. You will be able to note a huge gap in quality. Golden Axe in 3D was crap, as was Final Fight. Perhaps the closest we got to a decent 3D beat-em-up in the 90s was Die Hard Arcade, which is great, but in a janky sort of way, rather than a refined kind of way, if that makes any sense. So for this new Golden Axe and Streets of Rage game to be good would be unprecedented, with Sega needing to innovate to make this work. In the past, my wife Lady Deka, make sure you subscribe to her, has spoken to Yuzo Koshiro in the past about why Streets of Rage has never been successfully transitioned to 3D, with him explaining in his opinion that such a feat in the early 2000s would have been too great, with a natural evolution for something like Streets of Rage to have needed to be in line with Grand Theft Auto 3, something that would have required an enormous amount of money and resources. So this brings me on to another issue with each of these modern iterations in each franchise. Back in the day, these brands were top of the food chain. They were close to as big as anything else on the market. However, in modern times, I do not trust Sega to throw the same amount of money at the likes of Golden Axe as say modern companies throw at their AAA titles. This means these titles will feel like glorified indie games at best, or Sega's cheap failed experiments at worst. A prime example of a title that felt like a cheap imitation and shadow of its former self is of course Shenmue 3, the budget follow-up to the once most expensive game of all time. Seriously, how can you follow up the most expensive game ever made with a game that looks as cheap and tacky as this? This is essentially my fear, that these titles will be more like Shenmue 3 rather than Streets of Rage 4. As for how I believe it to be possible to make the new 3D Streets of Rage and Golden Axe actually good, well, I think they need to be made to feel and play similarly to the likes of Bayonetta. The Bayonetta games are great hack and slash adventure titles that contain a gameplay formula that could successfully be applied to Streets of Rage or Golden Axe, if the care and attention was actually given. So, as you should be able to tell from all of this, I'm extremely skeptical about some of these games. After all, you know what they say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, you can't fool me again. Anyway, if you like beat 'em ups, I've covered loads on here in the past, so subscribe for my in-depth historical retrospectives and comment below how you feel about the return of these franchises. Cheerio.